Hello, Flat Earth researchers, debaters, and debunkers. For the record, the azimuthal equidistant map centered on the North Pole, the same as is used for the UN logo, is not the Flat Earth map. It is often mistakenly referred to as the Flat Earth proponents' only map and model as an alternative to the globe. But this in itself may well be a deception and a distraction. But what it is a way of being able to perceive the land masses that we know of in a different way other than the globe. And this is the challenge that faces anyone looking into the flat earth or researching flat earth, is to attempt to at least put aside the globe earth maps and models and start fresh to see what we can or cannot prove as our objective reality, and to discern the difference between subjective and objective reality. This is the crux of the issue. So it's a chance to talk about two main aspects of the flat earth topic here, and that is the maps and models that are used to prop up arguments on either side, as well as the characteristics of the people defending one or the other. So first of all, we have the genuine truth seeker who is prepared to question what we think we know and what we are told to believe is our objective reality. Now, of course, everyone's reality is something subjective. We all have different experiences, and they are always unique, and they create a certain reality for us as human beings interacting on this earth with everything else on the earth. And then we have the globe earth defenders who refuse point blank often to even begin to question. They will hold the globe as subjective reality and claim it is our objective reality, propped up with mathematical equations, assumptions, and interpretations. So it's important to point out that nothing actually changes as to the way we navigate across the earth and the things we see, such as sunsets and what have you. Nothing changes. It is always a matter of interpretation, something that is subjective. It doesn't define our objective reality, and that's what we're talking about here. So this whole topic centers around making this connection between our subjective and objective reality. And there are many things we are taught or told that are our objective reality. And this does start at childhood with our parents and with the education system. So it's not until later years, perhaps after some life experiences, that we can start to look back on how we are taught to think, what we are taught to think or believe, and the true nature of our reality. So as I said, the truth seeker will question everything, and that includes questioning what we are given as an alternative. The globe earth proponent would love to have an alternative explanation. Now what you'll find in this is you can make all kinds of explanations, but when it comes to actually coming up with undeniable objective proof, this is what neither side actually has, because there is a limit to our true knowledge about our objective reality. So this is the crux of the issue. What can anyone actually prove? Now, in my mind, and I'm sure in most flat earth proponents' minds, it is obvious that we are not on a spinning ball. This is physically impossible, and despite the objections from globe earth proponents, there is no science and no physics to back up the claims that we live on a spinning ball. It is all interpretations and assumptions to fit a particular model, a spherical model of an Earth spinning around the sun in space. So that extends well beyond anything that anyone can actually prove and goes into the realms of belief about the whole who are we, where are we, how did we get here, etc. So just looking at this azimuthal equidistant map, there are a lot of things that do make sense, but of course there are some things that don't fit with it as well. And this is one reason why Globe Earth defenders will point to this azimuthal equidistant map as being a ridiculous thing to believe in, and then claim that flat earthers don't know what they're talking about, and they don't know navigation, and they don't know mathematics. And this is what we find with the characteristics often of the people defending the globe, is there's this kind of superiority complex. There's this assumption that mathematics somehow proves the globe, and that navigation as well can prove the globe. But really, anyone who claims to know the true shape, dimensions, and location of the Earth really isn't being honest with themselves or with anyone else. So if they point to this azimuthal equidistant projection as the flat Earth model, well, first of all, they haven't done their research into what flat earthers are actually claiming, and for the most part it's just an acceptance that we do not know the true dimensions of the Earth, and there's very little that we can actually do to find out. Yet it will be used as an argument to say, oh, you flat earthers are ridiculous, you don't know what you're talking about. What we do have is a huge amount of water, and if you go down to the very fundamental level, nobody knows where all this water came from. We don't know where any of this material environment came from. We don't know where the land came from. Nobody is any authority on that. So at the very least, we can start with this understanding or realization that no one has any proof, only explanations. And they are very thin on the ground anyway, and they are quite fantastical as to where the water came from. You know, we have this idea that everything came from nothing in a big bang, etc., millions and billions of years ago, but none of that can ever be proven, and it's just a story, an explanation to go along with the whole globe Earth belief. So at the very least, one has to accept, it doesn't matter what you believe in, whether you believe you're on a spinning globe or whatever, there is no proof to back up any of these assumptions about how and why it all came about in the first place. And this is maybe where we need to start if we are going to make any progress whatsoever. Possibly one of the biggest challenges facing anyone looking into this is the longitude and latitude lines that are drawn out on any kind of projection, including the equator. But these are just imaginary lines, and they can actually be placed anywhere. They have just been predetermined in order for worldwide navigation. You have to have something to agree upon, and that includes time as well. You've got time zones that are somewhat dictated by the sun, but if you look into that, for example, you might be in the UK here, and if you're going by the sun to tell the time wherever you are should be dictated by when the sun is at its zenith, directly above you. But you might be in the UK, and it would be something like 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon before the sun is at its zenith. Then, of course, we have leap years and months with different days, and this is all because the sun has been used as a way to tell the time and also to define the maps and models, but it really doesn't fit. And if you look at the time zones as well, they're all staggered south of the equator, so none of this really matches up. It's almost impossible to really match everything up in our objective reality with the idea that we are on a planet spinning around the sun. But of course, because this construct of time has been created that is used worldwide, then everyone kind of gets familiar with it, and it appears to make sense. But on scrutiny, it doesn't, because really the sun isn't obeying any time construct that's laid out by humans. It's doing its own thing, as is the moon and the stars. They're all doing, and the wandering stars as well. They're all doing their own time. So this is what we have to keep in mind with the globe, is that it has been defined by making observations of the sun predominantly and using it as the central point on which to create the model, and then telling us that this is our physical reality. So this does take a lot of time and investigation and scrutiny to really break down and realize that what we have is an imaginary human-made construct that really doesn't have any solid basis in reality. It's just something that's been solidified over time to have us all working and navigating in a way that becomes familiar to anyone that has to communicate and do things on this earth that crosses great distances. So to some extent you have to ignore these lines. You have to realize that these lines are an overlay on top of any kind of projection that are used to determine the projection. But if we just go through some of the many possible projections that are made, of course they distort the land masses, but that's because of this insistence on adhering to these longitude and latitude lines and the equator. If you just look into the whole idea of the Earth spinning around the sun and tilting, and then you've got different poles. You've got the geographic poles, and then you have the magnetic poles. These are all add-ons. You've got the axial tilt as well. These are all different things we've had to add on and to try to define the maps and models, which are somewhat unnecessary. If you have a sphere, then there is no particular point on that sphere which is the top or the bottom. So all these maps and models attempt to have a top and a bottom, or two diametrically opposed poles, simply to create maps and models that we can follow. But just look at the wild shapes that can be made from this just by manipulating the coordinates and the mathematics, sticking to this idea that it's all determined by longitude and latitude lines. But these are political. They're not real. They're just used for, as I said, timekeeping purposes or transportation purposes or navigation, just so that we can all agree on certain locations being at certain coordinates. But when it comes to the North Pole or the South Pole, allegedly, then this is where we have many things that cannot be confirmed. We do not know the true extent of these the land masses surrounding these poles, or whether they're actually related to land masses. They're just related to magnetism. But what happens when you go to the North or South Pole is that you lose all direction. So all that happens really is you go beyond the ability to determine your direction. So this is what creates the boundaries beyond which we become lost. We get distracted by all of this, these overlays and these different bits and pieces that make up the model. And this is an interesting projection to look at, because everything appears to be in proportion here. But look at the massive lack of any land mass north of Europe, etc., and Greenland. And then we look at this massive land mass down here of Antarctica. Now, again, when it comes to defenders of the globe pointing at flat earthers and ridiculing them. They will presume that flat earthers say Antarctica doesn't exist, or that you'll get shot down if you go to Antarctica. Now, no one denies that there is ice around here, south of Australia or south of Africa here, and south of South America here. No one's denying that these pieces of land exist, but whether they actually join together to form a single continent, or whether that continent, whether you can travel beyond the continent of Antarctica, is nothing that anyone can actually prove. So yes, you can fly from Australia over the edges of Antarctica here, which is in fact Australian territory. Okay, so you could take this kind of projection, or any of the other projections, and you could say that from Australia you head south generally to what is called the South Pole, which is, it becomes a point on a map or a model, but again, really, this is just a point at which compasses don't work anymore. They don't point north anymore. So you could come down here to the South Pole and then you can head back up north to the bottom of South America. And then, of course, you could claim that people have traversed the South Pole from north to south and then north again. But you can see on this particular projection, that doesn't mean that they've continued going south. They've just kind of got as far south as they can go and then turned around and headed back north again. Yeah. So this is just interpretation. So even if someone did circumnavigate the so-called globe from north to south and then back up north again, it doesn't mean that they've carried on going south. They just turned around and started heading up north. So it's just interesting to look at, for example, the Antarctic Treaty. When you take a flight from Australia and go to what is called East Antarctica, then of course you are in Australian territory. So an Australian airline is allowed to go into its own territory. Now these territories are designated in the Antarctic Treaty, just between a few countries. It doesn't mean that the rest of the world agrees with them. It's just that these countries decided between themselves where they would draw their boundaries. And what's interesting here is we have in what's called West Antarctica unclaimed land. So this massive section here doesn't belong per se to anybody. It's I suppose you could call it no man's land or free land. So if any exploration was to take place, then this would be the place to enter. And in fact, I saw somewhere it's called Byrd land. So this is maybe where Admiral Byrd was talking about going beyond the South Pole and discovering huge tracts of land that he said were mountainous and not covered with ice and have lots of resources, etc. So you have this massive section here, and of course this there are no other countries around this, so people are not going to really enter from this area, because up here you have South America coming in here. I'll just have a look at this other one, which shows that in a little bit more detail. Now what you have here is the United Kingdom and Argentina overlapping their claims to this piece of Antarctica. So that is a consideration for the implications of the Falklands War. Maybe there was a lot more at stake there than that the tiny Falklands Islands inhabited by a few people. Yeah, Argentina and the UK were fighting possibly over something a lot larger than the Falkland Islands. So here we can see again this unclaimed area here, and then so we have New Zealand's claim, Australia's claim, a slice of France here, Norway, Argentina, the UK and Chile. It's interesting to note that the United States of America has no claim to this either. And it's interesting that Norway has a massive claim here. So these are the countries that have buddied up and made their own claims and agreed upon them, but it doesn't involve the rest of the world, all the other countries in the world. So this becomes a very contentious issue. So of course, if you did want to explore Antarctica, for convenience, you would have to enter through one of these territories, unless you wanted to enter through the unclaimed territory, which is basically faced with a vast ocean. There is no nearby land, so to get to this part would be extremely difficult, and who knows the true extent of this area. So you can just, I mean, in your mind's eye, you can cut this up and you can expand it and make it any shape you want. And this is the thing again: what can we confirm as being the true nature of Antarctica? It might well be an island of this shape. Now, what if it's cold here around the outer reaches of just go back a second. For example, it's cold because it's beyond the warmth of the sun. But then, according to Admiral Byrd, when he travelled beyond the South Pole, which would be down here, then he experienced land without snow and ice on it. So is it possible that you enter an area where that is being warmed by another sun? Who knows? Just extrapolating here, it's just an idea. For example, Mars could be another sun that's just very, very far away, and it has its retrograde motion, which could account for it being a sun covering another mass of land. Our land masses, what we know as the Earth, is determined only by a sun. And of course, if you have detached from the heliocentric model and looked into everything, all the science that surrounds observations and visibility, then you can realize that we can have a local sun lighting up parts of the Earth. It doesn't have to be a globe. The only reason it has to be a globe with the heliocentric model is because then that's the way you can justify a transition between day and night. If you're going to insist that the sun is somewhat stationary and the Earth is moving around it, or the sun is at the center, then of course you have to have the Earth as a sphere, and you have to say that it's moving and spinning in the model. But of course we do not have any physical measurement to back up that claim. There has never ever been any scientific measurable proof that the Earth is moving. All we actually see is the sun moving, and the moon and the stars. It's all down to interpretation. And it just goes back to having the mental capacity and emotional capacity to detach from what we have been told repeatedly since childhood is our objective reality. Put it aside and see if it's possible to perceive it in any other way. It's not a case of having an alternative. This is something that the globe Earth proponents will insist upon, is that we have alternatives, working models. But there is no working model in the first place. There is just a globe Earth model that has been cobbled together using observations of the sun, which still doesn't fit when it, as I said earlier on, when it comes to time zones and things like that, and making up leap years and months with 31 days or 28 days here and there. This is all just ways of putting sticky plasters on a model that doesn't actually work. So there is no working model, and so there is no need to come up with an alternative to satisfy the globe Earth proponents, because they don't have one in the first place. So let's move on from this. we'll just go just as an example of the different kinds of projections that we can have. Here is the Gleason's map, and again, it works. If we just have a look at what, for example, Wikipedia says about projections. There's a south projection. So, just to be clear, the azimuthal equidistant projection is an azimuthal map projection. It has the useful properties that all points on the map are at proportionally correct distances from the center point, and that all points on the map are at the correct azimuth, or direction, from the center point. So, you just determine where you want the center, and then you can point from that center. A useful application for this type of projection is a polar projection, which shows all meridians lines of longitude. Now, again, bearing in mind that these are imaginary lines. They don't exist on the Earth. They're just like borders for a country. They're drawn up on maps to determine boundaries as straight with distances from the pole represented correctly. Again, the pole isn't necessarily a specific geographical location. It's just a point at which compasses don't work anymore. So the flag of the United Nations contains an example of a polar azimuthal equidistant projection. So that's the one down here. So of course, yes, if you're looking into the flat Earth, then this is one of the first things that you'll come across is this, and then you realize that the governments are using a flat Earth map, but again, it's just a projection. We can see here that projections are possible from any point, really. And we have the mathematical definition, but do not let people tell you that mathematics proves the globe. Mathematics is just a description. It's just a way of describing things, and when you describe something, you are making an interpretation. You are translating something, whether it's, as we said, a sunset. You watch a sunset. That doesn't mean that the Earth is moving to make the sun set. It is how we see it. And children will know this. They will see the sun going away from them. They understand it. They don't need to be told, or if they haven't been told, that's how they will see it. They will see the sun going away when it's setting. They don't assume, and there is no need to assume, that the Earth is a rotating sphere to make that happen. This is interesting, though. Applications. In the case of radio, this projection, the azimuthal direction projection, allows for directional antenna aiming, especially in the case of high-frequency communications. An operator can point the antenna, usually by an electric rotator, simply locating the target in the map and rotating the antenna to the angle indicated by the map. The map should be centered as nearly as possible to the actual antenna location. So you would create your azimuthal map with a center point for your location, and from there you would direct your antenna. So this works in many respects. It has its practical uses, so this cannot be denied. It's just that the longitude and latitude lines force this distortion of the land masses. Australia doesn't suddenly become much longer. The distances are still the same. It's just that on the map, because the lines become wider and wider, in the physical reality is that you cross the same distance, but on the map it appears to be a greater distance, simply because you're adhering to these imaginary lines of longitude and latitude. So let's go back here. You can tell the time and track the sun, etc. with this, and down here it even tells us how the solstices work. You've got the June solstice and the December solstice, and if you look into zetetic astronomy, you can interpret the solstices and what have you as being this the sun doing a kind of corkscrew of concentric circles throughout the year. The Earth does not have to be moving or tilted or spinning to create the seasons. The sun can do that all by itself. If you're going to refer to the sun as some kind of proof that you live on a globe, that is ridiculous, because the sun is an intangible object. We don't know what it's really doing. We don't know its true distance. We don't know its true dimensions. But of course, you can calculate and assume dimensions and distances for your model. The objective reality that we experience is that the sun has a job to do in creating the seasons, and it appears to work in tandem with the moon, and it's part of the big cosmic clock in the sky. That's about as much as we can ascertain from these observations, is that they certainly have a purpose. And of course, when it comes to the tides and the moon and the idea that the moon's gravity creates the tides, this is just another assumption. It's the same as the tides being in sync with the moon doesn't mean that the moon creates tides. It's the same as the clock on your wall might dictate when you need to get up or go to work, but the action of getting up and going to work is separate. It's just the clock is just an indicator of when that happens. And of course, clocks use circles, they use the 360 degrees, and they represent a human construct of time. Clocks have to be set backwards and forwards, etc., throughout the year, just to even everything out with this construct that we have made in order to communicate and do things in a synchronized way. It still doesn't dictate the shape of the Earth. So time zones and what have you are, again, ridiculous arguments for the globe. These are just things that we have constructed as an abstract concept that really don't necessarily dictate our physical reality. So back to projections. I just really want to go through these to show that there are many different ways of projecting Earth on flat maps. If a navigator or a pilot or such is going to insist that geometry and navigation proves the globe, they're just being dishonest, because geometry allows us to project maps and models onto flat surfaces and assume globes or flatness or circles or what have you. It's all interchangeable. Again, it's all a matter of interpretation. So nobody has any proof either way, just from navigating or making flight plans or what have you. These circular lines or these arcs of flight plans, as illustrated here, can become straight lines depending on how you make your projection. Yeah, so it is all just interpretation. It's all abstract when it comes to maps and models. It doesn't represent our physical reality. This is an interesting map that was made by the Cable and Wireless Company, the Great Circle Map, which shows how all these continents and countries were connected with undersea telecommunication cables. I'm not sure of the year, but it was long before the idea of satellites came about. So we can see that communication across the Earth as we know it has been possible for a long, long time. Of course, we do not have any cables going to Antarctica down here, and it's always ignored. In fact, here we have Antarctica as a piece of land. It doesn't go all the way around, as is illustrated in the azimuthal map. So perhaps Antarctica is just a chunk of land that is beyond the warmth of the sun that is going around this small-ish area of land here, and what's beyond that nobody knows. But this is of course our containment area. This is where we are bounded in or globed in. No need to create physical boundaries or walls when we just appear to be surrounded by miles and miles of ocean, and then ice, for which no one can really spend any length of time in. Here's another flat map, the Gilbert-Johnson map, which appears to have Australia and other countries kind of in proportion. So this works as a projection. Here's another one, 21st century map of the world. We have South America over here and Australia over here. So you could in fact draw a straight line for a flight between these two places, and this one does have Antarctica going all the way around. But again, it's just a projection. Okay, it doesn't necessarily dictate our true reality. Here's another one that again, you could draw a straight line from South America to Australia, and you wouldn't have to cross North America. And all these pieces of land allegedly beyond what we know. So this is interesting because the land masses are not distorted by the insistence on having these longitude and latitude lines. You just have the circles illustrating the tropics and the equator. But who knows if these pieces of land really exist? But this map came from somewhere. But again, we're limited to how much research we can do to prove anything about its relationship to reality. But why not? This may well be something that's possible or truly exists. We've just never travelled far enough to find out in this day and age. There's another projection. Okay, here we have the distortion again, but of course the distortion is because it's centered on the north. But when it comes to the north, we have many maps of Hyperborea, which may well still exist or may well have existed in the past. But here we have magnetic mountain at the center with these seas or massive rivers leading to the center, in which all the world's oceans feed into, and maybe this is where the tides originate from. This is where water is pouring in or pouring out of the center of the earth that we know of, but it's nothing that we can prove unless we travel beyond somewhere like Greenland. But there are many maps illustrating Hyperborea, which are very difficult to confirm, even for modern day pilots, what have you. This is an example of how triangles and planes can be used to create a globe model, or even construct a three-dimensional globe. So we have this kind of dome here created out of triangles. Just there's other ones we can look at. Here, for example, is the geodesic viewpoint of the Earth. So this is derived triangular mesh. This mesh was created by subdividing the faces of an icosahedron into n(xn) equilateral triangles and projecting those onto the surface of the globe. So mesh overlay, put on top of a map and then projected as a sphere. But of course we all know that triangles are two-dimensional shapes, and within a triangle you have 180 degrees. So this can then be translated into something spherical. With these 180 degrees, you then have the ability to create 360 degrees just by multiplying and putting all the triangles around a spherical model. So all these numbers can interact. They're intercompatible. The triangles, the squares, they can all be used to make projections of spheres. Doesn't make it our physical reality. It's just projection. So anyone who is proficient in mathematics and uses it to navigate or whatever, if they are honest with themselves and with you, they will admit that it's all interchangeable. There is no precedence. There is no need to presuppose that it starts with a globe and then you project it onto a flat map. They are interchangeable, and these projections can be made either way. What we should be starting with is our physical reality. There is no measurement, there is nothing to dictate that we are moving, nothing to dictate that we are on a sphere. It's especially when it comes to the physics of water. So to presuppose that we're on a globe, this is why it took so long for the so-called scientific community to come up with some kind of answer to how is it possible that we can be on a globe in the heliocentric model. What about the physics? How can we have everything sticking to the outside of a globe? So then they come up with a number which is based on the rate of acceleration at which a solid object or a dense object will fall through the air, 9.8 meters per second. And this is not something, there's things like terminal velocity to consider. Things don't carry on speeding up and accelerating. It's just a number has been measured at the rate of acceleration that something will fall close to the Earth, and this is then used as so-called proof that there is gravity that makes us do the physically impossible, stick to a sphere. Yeah? It's all just interpretation and mathematical manipulation. So we have these different viewpoints that can be made just by, again, using triangles to create a globe model. The globe model, whether it's on paper or even created in some kind of 3D program, doesn't represent our reality. It's just an interpretation. Here we go. This is CGI using triangles to create an apparent globe on a two-dimensional surface on a screen here. So it's all a matter of interpretation and just manipulating mathematics to give the appearance of a globe using two-dimensional shapes and angles. So this, just like to finish off on this one, just to really drive home that point, is that when you use triangles to create a three-dimensional shape, you have here this one triangle here used as a side, and then you get what's called a one-frequency dome. And then if you take that triangle and you add more triangles inside it, you can then have a two-frequency dome, and then a three-frequency and four-frequency dome. And as you add more triangles to your main triangle, then of course you get a smoother and smoother transition into this dome or globe, and so it goes on, the 5-frequency dome and the 6-frequency dome. So here we've got something that's much more akin to a very small, smooth globe, but based on using two-dimensional triangles. And of course that's what navigation is based upon, triangulation. Whether it's GPS or what have you, it's all done with triangulation. So you're taking this two-dimensional mathematics and angles and then applying it to a spherical mathematical model. So do not let anyone tell you that navigation proves the globe. They simply cannot do that. And even the navigation software that people use, such as pilots, will make these transitions from a flat surface to a visually spherical surface. It doesn't mean that we're navigating around a globe. Google Earth probably does the same thing. You have there is a point where it makes a transition from being flat maps to this spherical representation of the Earth. So this comes back to the characteristics of the people defending the globe. They make assumptions that flat earthers are using only one particular map, which is not true. So there is no adherence to any particular map or model. It's just evidence that you can represent the Earth in any kind of projection that you like, depending on your requirements. Neither of them prove, one way or the other, the true nature and the true dimensions of the Earth we are on. But anyone can ascertain for themselves that we are not on a globe. There is no proof for it. There is no measurable proof. There is no way to prove that the direction of down becomes any different just because you change location. So with that, I'll leave it to you to make your own discernment about what is or is not the nature of our reality, and hopefully you will continue to make your own minds up rather than listening to or believing people who wish to make claims either way. Thank you very much.